I would that you show my face. For the time has arrived to reveal all things. But in the interest of the fiction and nonfiction narrator, let's not show my face. Not yet. Who am I, you ask? They call me Moses, the Black Moses, because I am, I was, and I will never be. It began with these islands, the Bahama Islands, the spot where the old world met another world, the spot where Imperial Europe gave birth to its new empire, its new world. Thus, it gave birth to me, the Black Moses. In this hour came the dawn of the American War for Independence. From the British Empire, when its British loyalists arrived to the island ports and brought their African slaves. Shortly after, rumor grew here of a magical and powerful slave ported further south of the sea. This slave led his fellow men in a blood revolt against the ruling French Empire, fighting for and winning their complete independence. It was the first time I showed my face to America and the New World, setting the stage for the end of slavery throughout it. The movement was called the Haitian Revolution. They called him Black Moses. In this hour, as the Africans were trafficked to and fro, the empire also imported and exported weaponry, as guns became the export from Europe to the north of the sea for the American Civil War. By now, my history here became legend, and my legend became myth, until rumor and whispers of me grew again, this time of a mighty woman slave ported further north of the sea. Through a non-violent protest, she created a social network of churches, meeting points, secret routes, and safe houses from the bondage in the South to freedom in the North. The movement was called the Underground Railroad. They called her Black Moses. In this hour, as the black market of human trafficking to the north persisted, there was also exported rum with the introduction of liquor prohibition in America. This time another passed through the island ports on his way south of the sea and preached the violent gospel of liberation. Local legend has it his face shined before the crowds, and that the people reached out if only to touch the hem of his garment. It was called the Back to Africa movement. They called him Black Moses. And so, with every waking hour, as the empire ruled these island ports and their New World Africans went to and fro, the remnant slaves that remained here, neither here nor there, waited. Their heart's cry demanded for the end of empire and for the introduction of democracy and equality. Theirs was a collective prayer for a Black Moses of their own. The Bahama Islands of the 1930s belonged to the British Empire, and the interests of the British were best protected here by the Bay Street Boys. Bay Street Boys because they were elite merchants who governed from the colony's main street, Bay Street. And they maintained colonial power through segregation, banning blacks from businesses, hotels, beaches, and neighborhoods. But most of all, they maintained power through the absence of universal adult suffrage in these islands, where blacks were the majority. Over the hill, south of Bay Street, where LO was born in its ghettos, it was an informal, unspoken, but understood social structure for the indigenous Bahamians. The lighter your skin, the better your chances in the food chain.
Lyndon Pindling was born into a society that was very divided by race, color, and class. Lyndon Pindling's parents were Arnold Pindling, who was a Jamaican. He had come to the Bahamas, I think in the 30s, as a police officer. He later left the force and went into business.
Little LO's intelligence would qualify him to receive a high school education at the one and only high school available for Negro children.
I met L.O. Pindling in the government high school. You got to bear in mind at that time, government high school could only accommodate 20 students.
With its limited natural resources of sun, sand, and sea, the British chose tourism as the colony's white market development. But A.F. Pindling strove to ensure that his only begotten son escaped the fate of other darker-skinned island boys, the beggars of the tourist trade.
Pindling's father was a Garveyite. He was a great believer in Marcus Garvey. He had been a teacher in Jamaica, so he was an educated man.
Marcus Garvey was an apostle who enunciated, first of all, the need to recognize the dignity of people, regardless of color.
Marcus Garvey was also a firm separatist. He, like the white supremacist groups whom he would meet with and call the true white man, preached the doctrine of separatism. For Garvey believed that the only way for the black world to improve was to physically separate from the white world. But there was another on the American stage, one who preached the doctrine of integration.
For my message is a message of peace.
His name was W.E.B. Du Bois, a mixed-race descendant of Haiti.
W. Du Bois, wrote some real interesting books. At that time, there weren't that many prominent African Americans, leading a charge. And so he, along with a couple others, wanted to spread that across.
Garvey was mere political theater, the most dangerous enemy of the Negro race in America and the world. He is either a lunatic or a traitor. And Du Bois, purely and simply a white man's nigger, a little Dutch, a little French, a little Negro, a monstrosity.
He visited a number of islands in the Caribbean, and from New York, he wrote profusely, which influenced the thinking not only in the Caribbean, but in North America and in significant portions of the African continent.
When the dust settled, the crown would belong to Garvey on the American stage, and Garveyism was then chosen as the world's symbol for the Negro race. He became the universal Black Moses of the hour, advocating for the complete social, political, and economic independence of Negroes. However, it was the moderate and cool rhetoric of Du Bois that would most form the belief system of L.O. Pindling. Lyndon developed a vision of peacefully bringing about social justice to the British Bahama Islands. For my way is nonviolence. I am the doctrine of integration. Was I Du Bois, not Garvey, you ask? Well, I'm not sure. As the child Pindling was born and grew, there was born and grew another, one who also attended the only high school, one who was most inspired by a legendary labor blood riot against Bay Street in the 1940s. His name was Randall Fowlkes.
Randall was the father of labor in the Bahamas. When in the 50s, a lot of workers couldn't unionize by law.
He actually mobilized and established the Federation of Trade Unions. He was really the Moses.
It was Fowlkes who embraced and preached Garvey and not Du Bois. It was Fowlkes in which the words bloodshed and freedom were often used in the same sentence.
It was very difficult to control Sir Randall. He had fixed views, which I don't think was subject to change by reason.
In the 40s of the impoverished ghettos of Nassau, where Pendling and Randall Fowlkes grew, legend here speaks of the young Fowlkes, whom the people called Lil Moses, as the self-taught firebrand orator who shared ideas for revolution. And legend also tells of a young Pendling who worked in his father's East Street store selling goods. L.O. who possessed no real ideas for revolution against Bay Street, but he did possess the uncanny ability and gift of the sales pitch. He was Little L.O., the salesman.
If you had an idea and you went to Sir Lyndon with it, he could present that idea 20 times better than you could ever do. And when you hear it again, you say, Lord, how, I mean, you know, that thing is so good. He did not have a lot of original ideas himself.
With Garveyism now spread throughout the diaspora, A.F. Pendling decided his only son would become a revolutionary lawyer. He then sent the reluctant young salesman off to school in London, England. L.O. Pendling and the man to become his Aaron, his sidekick, arrived in London to witness much protest and agitation from its Garveyite students. Students like Kwame Nkrumah of the British Gold Coast and Jomo Kenyatta of British East Africa.
You know, I've had the privilege of being with Sir Lyndon personally in private environment, talking about his life. And those moments really changed my life because I heard the voice of a Moses. You know, he spoke in terms of, I really didn't want to do this, he says. You know, I didn't look for this. This found me. And all true Moses are that way. They don't seek power. Power chooses them. Life decides what they will become. Once they accept it, then they become a child, a victim of destiny.
We were in England at the time when there's eagerness throughout East and West Africa. Then, of course, there was agitation among the students, particularly African students. I thought Bahamas was the greatest thing in the world until a gentleman, he asked me where I came from. And apparently he was an African, Nigerian. When I told him from the Bahamas, he saw a frown in his face. And he told me what he thought about the Bahamas. So he says, remember one thing. He said, Bahamians are house slaves.
Or so this Nigerian thought, for I should not be underestimated. I am as I was acclimatized by the empire. But I will have change too, through Fowlkes. For out of chaos will come order. I am the doctrine of separatism.
So you're saying that your mirror has two faces? Is this why you're finally showing your face?
Well, technically, I haven't yet. For in truth, it was the black magical realism of film that got my social movement organized and moving in these islands. It was a fiction, yet non-fiction film that starred a Bahamian. And while disguised in showmanship, his 1950 Hollywood movie was titled almost prophetically, No Way Out.
It was the first time that a human being of color had a prominent profession and role in a major motion picture. He was a doctor.
County hospital, somebody yells murder.
But it's not the same when they yell it at me.
It's got to be. You're a doctor.
They're not yelling at the doctor, they're yelling at the nigger.
The fact that he was a doctor right there elevated us to a whole new level, because we were basically, before that, maids, porters, butlers.
The film, which directly addressed race, was banned in many places throughout the African diaspora, including Nassau, by the Bay Street Censorship Board.
So it was a breakout role. It was a breakout film because it turned it around. It turned it around so that the professionals were this African-American man, and the downtrodden or the poor people were the white people. So it gave us a sense of, we can be somebody, we do have value.
Randall Fox and others fought against the racist ban and won the right for the colony to see their native son in No Way Out. It was their first true taste of power, and the sweet victory kick-started an independent civil rights movement to further challenge Bay Street. By the time a now 23-year-old L.O. Pendling arrived home from London, Fox's movement was well in motion. These progressive independent movements were now popping up throughout the diaspora and were forming into political parties. Parties like the Progressive Liberal Party in the Bahamas and the African National Congress in South Africa.
It was to defeat what was a minority in the Bahamas in much the same way as in this country. In South Africa, we too had to defeat a white minority.
My father was commissioned to do the role in Cry the Beloved Country with Canada Lee in South Africa. They were going to shoot. But at the time, South Africa was in apartheid. So my father and Canada Lee were not allowed to enter the country as men. They had to come into the country as the director's indentured servants. That was the only way they could come in. They could not stay in the hotels. They could not eat in the hotels. They stayed with Africans in their homes. And one evening, my dad talks about how they came to the door and they said, Nelson Mandela wants to see you, but he's in the bush, he's hiding out.
The Africans want the franchise on the basis of one man, one vote. They want political independence.
The Progressive Liberal Party, a collective army of liberal whites, mulattoes, coloreds, and blacks, worked together to fight for the civil rights of blacks and women. But when Pendling joined, or Midnight Black L.O., as he's been called, the black masses took note.
The Bahamas was controlled in every aspect of its life by the people we call the Bay Street Boys. In fact, you were told that if you voted for the PLP, you'd starve, because the PLP had nothing to give you. But when he joined, the PLP took on a different meaning.
Also, elections were corrupt. I mean, and they were it was open voting. You could be intimidated. Everybody knew, and the person who was running knew who you voted for.
Pendling would also marry at this time. His bride, a half-black, half-white woman who had moved to the capital city of Nassau from the rural island port of Andros. A woman now of local legend, who at his side would come to be both a mate and a battle axe.
Seeing that my papa sent me to Nassau away from the black fellows in South Andros, when the engagement letters started to come in, and he thought it was time to get me out of there. And so he sent me straight to another black fellow, and he said he didn't know, I know what color he was, and I told him he was quite dark.
Pendling, the political philosopher, and Fox, the political scientist, would both be elected to the local British Parliament in the mid-50s as members of the PLP, winning 2 of the PLP's 6 seats, and though thought to be handicapped with darker skin tone, a suave, polished, and well-spoken L.O. would eventually be elected leader of the party.
When he was introduced, he was not introduced as Mr. Pendling or Mr. Pendling's son or Mrs. Pendling's son from East Street. He was always introduced as London trained. Magical words. He's London trained. He's not like Randall Fox. When you got your BTE, my brother, that's been to England. that stamped you as a superior human being in itself.
Fox would then condemn the PLP as false, a party wanting mere acceptance and not true revolution. He left the party and began his own, a separatist socialist labor party. He would later write that,
I am not sure of their motives. They seem more to want to be accepted by the white people than believing that black people are capable of standing on their own.
Fox was irreverent, a fool and dangerous, one who could destroy the colony.
Mr. Pindling, how much freedom do the colored people have in the Bahamas?
It's limited, I should say. Limited in education, limited in finance and commerce, an opportunity to reach to the higher spots in certain jobs.
By now, the British colony was a post-World War II boom of mass tourism and Caribbean tax haven banking, a hedonistic haven for all things rich and white. For the uneducated masses of blacks, except for the few who entertained the white tourists in nightclubs.
Big black pepper, crisp fried beef flap. Yarrow, Herald, Evening News, headlines and gossip.
They were the maids and butlers of the hotels. They were the taxi drivers of tourists. They were the janitors of offshore banks. While a paradise of peace on the surface, tensions of racial inequality brimmed underneath. Elo Pindling then sought an alliance in a neighboring Moses, one who also held the doctrine of integration and nonviolence.
Non-resistance leaves you in a state of stagnant passivity and deadened complacency, wherein nonviolent resistance means that you do resist in a very strong and determined manner.
I met Sir Lyndon Pindling. Well, the truth of it is, I met him with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King went to the Bahamas, and it was on the recommendation of some friends of his in Miami who knew Sir Lyndon Pindling, who was not Sir Lyndon then, but was just a young freedom fighter like we were.
I personally was inspired to quite a degree by the philosophers of Dr. King, his nonviolent techniques. I couldn't think that in our country with a 300-year colonial heritage, violence could ever hope to solve the problem.
America, like the Bahama Islands, asks me to be nonviolent and just, when it had also been born in violence and injustice. Not a chance.
The white man pays Reverend Martin Luther King, subsidizes Reverend Martin Luther King, so that Reverend Martin Luther King can continue to teach the Negroes to be defenseless. That's what you mean by nonviolent.
As irony would have it, the year King first appeared in the Bahamas was alongside Randolph Fox and his Labor Party. The year was 1958, the year of the General Strike.
It all had to do with the opening of the new airport at Windsor Field. Some of the taxi drivers mortgaged their homes to buy these brand new black spanking new limousines to taxi the tourists from the airport into the city.
And fellas who were there from 2 o'clock, they couldn't get a job because the hotels had their own transportation, the tour companies and all. And I made representation through the government.
With Pindling and Fox gaining momentum, it was only natural for the Bay Street colonials to suppress it. So they employed their private tour car companies, taking bread away from the lowly labor cab drivers.
Well, at that point, Clifford Darling and several others blocked the airport, locked their cars, and they organized the strikes with the labor union. With Sir Randolph Fox. They went from hotel to hotel.
Lyndon Pindling played a really significant part in the 58th strike because he worked along with Randolph Fox. And they agreed that when they said now, everybody would just stop working.
The word was now. And every waiter, every waitress put their trays down and shut down the city for 18 days.
As the separatist strike endured, the British Crown would send its troops to the islands. Some of the locals were offended and were ready and encouraged to retaliate.
The fellas came, they were mad about what was going on. And they came there in their cars with dynamite and gasoline to burn down Bay Street.
Let me tell you what that was. I'm sure that was agent provocateur. There were people trying to give you weapons to make you tear Bay Street, because that would give them an excuse to shoot you and wipe you out. And so the clinging to nonviolence was not only moral and theological, it was tactical. I remember going into Mississippi in those days, and there was a group of kids in a church who were trying to stir up a riot, and they wanted to get guns. But when I landed, there was a 50 caliber machine gun on top of the the airport, pointed down at me coming off the plane.
The Bahamian people finally reached the point of exhausted patience.
I would that Fox had but a taste of Bay Street blood. But he was eclipsed by L.O. Pendling.
We should like universal suffrage and a ministerial system of government, based on, the whole thing based on universal adult suffrage.
Pendling used the peaceful protest to communicate and sell the idea of universal adult suffrage to the British. And he sold it. One man, one vote. Pendling, self-centered, one who saw everyone and everything in terms of how he could use them to satisfy his own lust for wealth and power. On his way to the top, he rubbed out the competition with style.
We have come to you because we wish you to investigate and help to correct a situation in our island which is packed with explosive potential.
That was a pre-runner to trying to convince the British that something is wrong and they must do something about it. The majority will never have a say under those rules.
The rules were gerrymandering, a classic trick of the empire. So that now, even with one person, one vote, the black vote and the woman vote would remain suppressed. Shortly after the general strike, Bay Street had formed into an official political party, calling itself the United Bahamian Party, the UBP. One of its generals was said to have declared from the shadows, "The niggers must be stopped."
What I did see as I became involved in the Bahamas was that the UBP became, they were digging their heels in. I think they felt they were threatened by things that were happening in the world, as well as changes that they could see coming in the Bahamas.
The protest marches continued. Fox led his marches in the name of independence. And Pendling, who by now had been to jail for agitating such protests, led his in the name of integration. But with the boundary cuts introduced, trade unionists prepared to attack Bay Street and run its halls with blood. To avert pending doom, Pendling was given an idea by Loftus Roker and others to stage the largest protest in the colony's history. The day would be called the Mace Incident, also known as Black Tuesday.
Perhaps the greatest moment in Pendling's career would be April 27, 1965, better known to most people as Black Tuesday, more so than any other event. I think was the turning point in our history for majority rule.
Because that day, huge crowds came down to demonstrate against the Boundary Commission.
Well, the people were getting frustrated. That is quite true. We had a number of persons who decided that if the same trick is played and that all hope was gone, that we would have to take the law into our own hands, arm ourselves, and fight for our freedom.
You know how easy it would have been if Sir Lyndon had given the word for us to burn the town down? You know how easy that would have been? People did almost anything Sir Lyndon said to do.
The idea involved throwing the mace out of Parliament. The mace, which served as a prime symbol of British authority.
And he knew exactly at what point to do that when Sir Lyndon got up from his seat and walked over to the Speaker's desk and just lifted the mace. And then I understand he said that the mace is the power of the people. It represents the people. And the people are outside. And he hurled it through the window. Bay Street was lined off with placard bearers, including myself.
See, I knew so much about what he did for the Bahamian people. A lot of times I was prepared to overlook things that he shouldn't have done. So Lyndon, after a couple of minutes, catch himself, says, "Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, let us move from this place because they're going to arrest us. Let us meet over at Windsor Park." And within 5 minutes, the place was empty. There was nobody on Bay Street. Only a leader could do that.
Black Tuesday could have ended in a bloodbath. And I really think that it was Lyndon Pindling who was able to contain the crowd.
The British, in an effort to avert pending doom, then made sure that whenever the next general election would be called, it would best reflect democracy in these island ports.
We wanted the people of the Bahamas, the voters, to decide whether they thought that we had been a good government or not. So, our Premier requested the governor to dissolve the House of Assembly and call an election.
The Bay Street Boys set the date for the next general election for January 10th, 1967. And there's the legend of what happened when L.O. went to the island port of Andros to campaign. There he met a minister, or as some have come to call him,
prophet, standing there to meet us. And he said, "I heard about you, Mr. Pindling. I heard about you, and I know you're going to win this election." And my husband said to him, "Well, sir, how do you know?" He says, "Well, I will tell you. You come in my house and I will tell you how I know that you're going to win." And he got the Bible and he said, "You turn to Exodus chapter 12.
The book of Exodus, chapter 12, which tells the story of how Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt, the land of bondage. This Exodus, which officially began on the 10th day of the first month.
He says it's there in the Bible for you, and if you believe in God, then you believe what you're reading, and I'm telling you that you're going to win. But we were all in awe. But we couldn't talk it, I mean, because that was something you had to ponder. And you didn't want to get ahead of yourself, because you were fighting the mighty Bay Street.
The day came, and it seemed as if all the eyes of the British and American press had descended on these little islands. The Bay Street Boys did what they usually did campaigning on the islands. They bribed and intimidated for votes. And true to the New World oligarchy form, they branded the moderate Pindling as a communist out to destroy the colony. It seemed hopeless. The election happened. The votes were counted. Tensions could not be tighter. And to everyone's amazement, it was a tie. The White Party had won 18 seats, as did the Black Party. All that was left was Randall Fox from the Labor Party, who won his seat, and Alvin Brannan, an independent white Bahamian, of whom it was almost certain he would side with Bay Street.
We knew we were getting, we knew we would have the support of Randall Fox. There was no question about that. We didn't have to ask him. We were not sure about any other. But Sir Lyndon Penley picked up the telephone right in my house. As soon as he called Alderman Bennett said to him, "Yes, Prime Minister, or Premier, what can I do for you?" And of course, he gave him his full support.
With a coalition arrangement in place, so began the exodus as the British Bahama Islands would see its first black government elected. The lore and myth of January 10th was made even more propagandist for Pendling's agenda when the British government coincidentally formed the government on the 14th day of the first month, the day the book of Exodus called the Passover. L.O. Pendling and his team of commoners now had the responsibility of running the British colony, with the black masses making its psychological exodus in the spirit of the false prophet Dubois. Truer to Garvey, many white Bahamians began to make a geographical one. They separated. As the separatists scattered, some fled for a white-ruled America, some Europe, some Australia, some even went as far as apartheid South Africa.
And I'm afraid that has been misunderstood so often. It could just as easily, and perhaps much better, be described as a policy of good neighborliness.
It was the same sort of phenomenon that you saw around the continent here. For instance, when Angola got liberated in 1975, you had Portuguese leaving Angola to come to South Africa. The same thing happened with regard to the Portuguese from Mozambique. I'm saying that 1967, people would have left Bahamas because they would find comfort in a white-ruled South Africa. Once they'd lost the capacity to govern in the Bahamas, they looked for a place which they thought was kind of ruled by people of kindred spirit.
The black popular vote was the social exodus. But in the next phase, Moses faces the armies of empire when approaching the waters that lead to the promised land.
The area in which we seek to expand most quickly and most effectively would be in the education, health, and welfare areas. As you know, our big gripe has always been that not enough of the country's income has been able to filter down to the bottom.
66, 67 season, he was a breakthrough leader. He faced the headwinds first. So his election was a breakthrough. You can only appreciate him in the context of his time. But the breakdown, the cutting edge barriers of racial colonialism and apartheid in the Caribbean or in the Bahamas. That's 3 years after Mandela went to jail. So you have Winnie Mandela in that season going to jail in South Africa. We have Dr. King at the top of his work in 64, 5, and 6. And out of all of this comes a guy who is steady and smart, who became instantly an international hero.
The new Caribbean leaders seemed almost at rivalry. It was a friendly competition to see who would be the best and most effective statesman for the region. Of course, their ambition made it easier to divide them. Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and most notably, and personally closer to Pendling, was his friend, the Moses of British Guyana, Forbes Burnham,
who had studied with L.O. in London, as would have been the case with other people like Errol Barrow, Michael Manley, who were all in London as students at a time when we had no regional university of our own.
I don't visualize any major economic policy change. I think it would perhaps be a little dangerous for us to make any radical change in economic policy that might upset our tourist industry and the present flow of investment capital to the islands.
When he assumed the portfolio
of tourism for a period of time. He started out his first day in office by going to the airport and there greeting visitors. But then he also went into some of the hotels, performed as a bellman.
Forbes Burnham saw it another way. He condemned tourism in the Caribbean, calling it a tourist plantation.
The concept of black power was very strong. And I remember Pinling telling me one day, when he went to meetings of CARICOM, people like Burnham in Guyana and others saw him as a sort of almost Uncle Tom. See, for Pinling, it was about changing the mind of the people. It was a big part about getting people to understand the difference between service and servitude. That's why the Bahamas made such dramatic, differentiated itself from so much of the Caribbean during that era, because we were the only ones out there talking tourism. Well, by the time Pinling left office, every Caribbean country was following his model.
The Bahamas are primarily known as a place in the sun, a winter vacation spot for American tourists. But in recent years, the Bahamas have been the scene of a black nationalist movement.
The story chronicled Pinling's agenda to sell an entitlement program idea all too familiar for black capitalists. Only on this colony, it would be named.
Bahamianization was really what Americans came to call, the equivalent in the United States would have been affirmative action. It was the instrument by which the government ensured that Bahamians would be given primacy in the distribution of employment opportunities.
Bahamianization is a word be coined. It was not necessarily getting Bahamian a job, that's not all Bahamianization. Bahamianization was to give Bahamian an opportunity through education. They go hand in hand.
Bahamianization was also about regaining control of the colony's immigration, especially on the island port of Grand Bahama, where colonial free trade had run amok. The Bay Street Boys, much like the great white general Cecil Rhodes did in Africa, formed a covenant with British, Canadian, and American investors to rule this island port and develop it into a free trade zone. A free port, despite its poor black residents who lived there. Grand Bahama Island was renamed the Grand Bahama Port Authority Limited. The Port Authority also had control of who it could import and export. Whites were imported from throughout the British Empire to work there. Some within the PLP felt there was a method to the madness of the island.
They saw that majority rule was inevitable. And it was a calculated plan to use Freeport in Grand Bahama as a site to bring in foreigners who would become residents, and most of them would be white, and so that the majority in the country would not be black, that the majority would be white.
Well, it was crazy. I mean, you had doormen from England, the guys who were opening the door of the hotels. He was from England. You had taxi drivers who were non-Bahamians. You had all manner of menial jobs being done by foreigners. You had busboys who were foreigners. And these were white foreigners too.
You remember the words of Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, these people are multiplying too fast, and they will soon outnumber us. In other words, the slaves eventually become more than the master. And the same thing happened in all contexts. You know, if you study these islands in the Caribbean, it ends up being more blacks or more Indians versus the European whites.
At that time, Freeport was a bustling place, but mostly peopled with Americans and foreign persons, Germans, etc. Very busy, lots of construction. All of the businesses that I can recall were owned by white people and by people who were not Bahamian. Few lawyers. My husband Kendall had been the first black Bahamian, the first Bahamian, to open a law office in Freeport.
Pendling, now called Moses by the people, would head to the Grand Bahama Island port and give what would come to be lauded throughout the region as the bend or break speech. It admonished the armies of empire that a nation is not a company, but a people, and a people, not an organization, but an organism.
Sir Lyndon had exercised a great deal of patience, with the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the big wigs at the port, and had decided that the time had come to throw down the gauntlet and to say, look, either you're going to bend or you will be broken.
And you blame the government for this decline in tourism?
I would say yes, due to that immigration policy.
Freeport didn't bend, so he broke it. He performed a unilateral act, amending the covenant and restoring all immigration control to his government. And he saw more and more blacks managing hotels. They were no longer just cleaning the banks, but managing the banks.
It has had some unfortunate side effects. Perhaps most notably, it has contributed to the creation of a culture of mediocrity, in the sense that it did lead some Bahamians to believe that they didn't have to be world class. They didn't have to be the best at what they were doing, because they had a policy that would ensure that they would get the job.
Pendling's entitlement policy saw more and more Bahamians rising up in the system. It saw high schools and hospitals built on the colony. It saw Bahamians getting scholarships to go to universities abroad, but never a University of the Bahamas built. And here, the arts and culture was showcased for tourism, but never developed for national identity. Why not let the state fully develop the Bahamian in totality? Because it was best for Pendling to keep them ignorant and sexy, a people ripe and ready for the tourist plantation.
Do you have any strong feelings about being a colony?
Personally, no. Being a colony has not in the past, and is not in the present, proving to be a handicap to us.
By 1972, the British Bahama Islands was one of the few remaining British colonies in the empire. The reason why LO stalled the inevitable was clear. The white Bahamian community, who feared the very idea for sideways British Guyana, now renamed Guyana, had become completely socialist. In seizing the land from their imperial masters, the movement became physically bloody. Burnham now ran the new nation as a police state, where even opposing members were murdered.
Pendling was a very sensible pragmatist who had a great sense of the meaning of the term that politics is the art of the possible. You had Forbes Burnham, who had lurched off wildly to the left and really ended up damaging the country in a way that it is still trying to recover from. The Bahamas was a very vulnerable country economically, and that if it started to do quote-unquote crazy things like lurch to the left, the Bahamas could be destabilized very quickly by the United States, and of course before 1973 by the British.
To maintain the center line in selling the idea of independence, Pendling had to perform the classic Magic Negro Act, an act of keeping black solidarity while neutralizing white fears. All this was heightened and clashed when Nina Simone and Isaac Hayes visited the colony.
I mean, Nina Simone, in short, was brought out here for some benefit performance and ended up, cussing all the white people in the audience, I think, or certainly making them feel very uncomfortable. And it became a big story in the papers for a while.
The point was we had to sell the whole idea of independence to the electorate, to the people, because there were those who were saying, the white Bahamians, they were saying, we are not ready for independence. We can't control our own country.
My family were British soldiers that fought during the Revolution, and they came here in 1783. King George gave them 220 acres of land, which is called the Keys Tract, and we've been living and farming and using it ever since.
You still feel British, do you?
Oh, yeah.
Pendling traveled to island ports preaching independence and its virtues. When they went to the island port of Abaco, an island in which both its white and black inhabitants were pro-British, they were met with guns and dynamite.
I give him the greatest acclaim of all the things that he has done. To me, his greatest acclaim is a story that's never told. I was intimately connected with it. After the '68 election,
some fled for a white-ruled America, some Europe, some Australia.
And some of them probably came here to Georgia. Because when I was elected to Congress in 1972, early that year, I got a call in the middle of the night. And a guy said he got my phone number from a friend of mine. So I assumed he was all right. He said, "I'd like to talk to you. I have to talk to you tonight." I said, "Well, you know, I'll meet you somewhere." He said, "I'll come by your house, but I don't want to come in." So we have a long driveway, and I saw this man standing down at the bottom of my driveway, and he blinked his lights. So I went down, walked down, and he handed me a 3x5 card. And I introduced myself. He said, "I can't tell you who I am." He said, "If people knew I was doing this, I'd be killed." And he said, "But here is the name of a ship and the time it's going to be loaded up in Jacksonville. And it'll be 3 o'clock Wednesday morning." And sure enough, that Wednesday morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, they found that ship being loaded up with weapons, supposedly taking off at sunrise for Abaco. But it never became public. I mean, there was no newspaper story about it.
In the shadows, Pendling was being asked to perform the role of Shaft.
There were indeed people who would have intimidated the powers that used to be, and may even go so far as to seek revenge.
Instead, true to form, and in the name of black diplomacy, he magically made the story disappear.
I don't believe that there were any threats ever made by the Abaconians. I think the only real knowledge I have of a threat is a report I saw in a foreign newspaper written by somebody else who said that somebody told them they were going to do something. But those threats were never made by Bahamians in the Bahamas.
Pendling, to his good, saved this country from any semblance of violence. He saved this country.
In all truth, this movement also represented a deep psychological rupture for the white Bahamian who felt an allegiance to the Union Jack and the British Crown. And it was I to assure and comfort them that while empire had let us go, we must now part the waters, drown our invisible enemies, and chart our own course.
The Bahamas will become a new sovereign state on July 10, 1973.
I think it's a natural desire on the part of any man, and it's a natural desire on the part of any embryonic nation to want to stand on its own 2 feet and manage its own affairs.
It was all for this day, a day Pendling would declare as a day of destiny for the Bahama Islands.
Are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a dedicated nation, a people claimed by God as his own, to proclaim the triumphs of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light.
It gave hope. You see, in our country, what Dr. King always preached was, got to have hope. And there were times when, our plight seemed hopeless. And one of the things that the Bahamas did for Americans is that move represented hope. And then after that, when people would go to the Bahamas and to see a black face in charge, to see black people running the country.
The Bahamian flag would appear as a black pyramid of a people following Moses as he parched the waters onward.
In the sense that one thinks of Moses as a liberator, as a changer, he's the one who rebels against Pharaoh. When Onus says, Pharaoh let my people go, but my people let Pharaoh go, we can make it. So it represents a certain change in the culture.
The Independence Day ceremony was attended by world leaders and celebrities alike. And also said to be present somewhere in the crowd was one of the nation's newest and illustrious foreign investors, Robert Vesco.
Robert Vesco was a wanted criminal, a banker. The reputation of the Bahamas was wonderful for anybody who wants to buy safe haven, and Vesco needed one.
Pendling understood that true independence was not merely political, but economic, and now moved to create wealth opportunities for the still widening gap between the classes and the black masses.
A white visitor to black neighborhoods in Nassau does not find any evidence of the bitter, hostile, black power nationalism that's developed in so many Caribbean islands. But the ordinary black Bahamians, the voters who elected Lyndon Pendling, still live to a large degree in considerable poverty, far removed from the glamour of the tourist resorts.
In order to stay in the Bahamas, by then, Pendling realized that it's not enough to take money to his own pocket. He wanted also to contribute to the development of local industries.
So 1973 would also be the year that America demanded Vesco be extradited from the island ports. But little Moses refused to bend to American pressure and allowed Vesco to seek refuge in his country. Vesco saw the Bahamas as a new land of opportunity, a second chance to begin again, and pledged to work with Pendling in building various enterprises in the Bahamas, helping to develop a new nation of free markets. For the objective is still to advance Bahamians
to the very top spots in this country.
It was a different creature called Bahamians, because they realized that we held our destiny in our own hands. And it's up to us to make it or break it. And that is why every opportunity Lyndon had, he told them, now that we're in charge of our own destiny, you have to work harder to make it work, because the world is watching us.
The central political fact of these islands, Lyndon Pendling's overwhelming personal popularity. Hymns are sung in a political rally.
Brother Prime Minister, though you walk through the valley in the shadow of death, fear no evil, for God is with you. Put your hand in the hand of the man from Galilee.
Robert Shackney, CBS News, Nassau, the Bahamas.
By 1977, the one-man Moses movement was well established in the Bahamas and elsewhere. The one-man Burnham and his House of Israel had driven Guyana to brain drain, paranoia, and instability. But Pendling's Bahamas with all its foreign development, was forward, upward, and onward, to becoming the third highest per capita income in the Western Hemisphere, behind only America and Canada.
The motto, or the calling cry of the PLP was all together. And there was also the adoption of an African symbol, which was a calling cry for all together. And so more and more, it seemed that this personality cult was being developed.
The only comparison I could make was the way Papa Doc intoxicated the people to revere and fear him. In similar fashion, this image of Moses and us going to the Promised Land. Of course, you know where the Promised Land was.
Sigmund Freud says that you led the people to yourself. He says that the Promised Land was dependent on you. He says that you're an egomaniac.
As a president of the Republic of Uganda, and also I am speaking as a great man who is the conqueror of the British Empire.
He was celebrated as the greatest Bahamian, while whites in the opposition doubted if he was really Bahamian at all.
You know, myths were created and propagated, and one of the myths that was created and propagated by some evil-minded individuals without any foundation in fact was that, you know, Pinling had been born in Jamaica or had been born somewhere else and been brought to the Bahamas. It was all a way of challenging his legitimacy as a leader, much as, you know, recently happened with Barack Obama, where the birthers, as they were known, as someone pointed out, that there was a more compelling case to be made against John McCain, who had been born in the Panama Canal, but instead this focused on Barack Obama. Because again, a lot of people have a hard time accepting his quote-unquote legitimacy.
As political independence manifested, the new nation of the Bahamas would join the United Nations, and she would naturally become a member of the biggest grouping of states outside the UN, an organization called the Commonwealth Heads of Government.
Well, the Commonwealth is an outgrowth of the old British Empire, composed largely, but not exclusively anymore, of countries that had an association with the British Empire and with the British Crown.
Through the Commonwealth Heads of Government, Pinling would align himself firmly with other African nations, and these United States of Africa pushed for sanctions against what was once Southern Rhodesia to end the white minorities' racist regime. As Southern Rhodesia became Zimbabwe under its Moses, Robert Mugabe, attention would inevitably shift to South Africa, the only remaining colony where blacks had no civil rights. Like Garvey and King before him, Pinling would aspire for the American stage, and like his fellow African leaders, aimed to be one of the most famous voices in America and the world, the universal Black Moses.
Today, in 1979, the basic issues are still outstanding, and in the intervening years have become more entwined with the need to stabilize commodities and the prices. Indeed, the need for a whole new international economic order.
Have black nations failed?
As the script goes, I always stood a chance against Pharaoh, a face seen, but never stood a chance against the greater nemesis, Neo-Empire, which has no face. But of course, I think I stood a chance. The United States of America, now under President Ronald Reagan and the Reagan Doctrine, preached against any form of global socialism, whether it be in the Caribbean or South America.
To me, it's not a coincidence that Pinling's problems intensified after he took a very highly critical stance against the Caribbean Basin Initiative. He had actually been told, advised by some interests that were close to the American State Department that he shouldn't make a speech that he eventually did make, criticizing the Caribbean Basin Initiative. And it was not long after that that his problems started really developing with the Americans, as we say. And the Commission of Inquiry into Drug Trafficking, really intensified that.
What it brought about was a revelatory investigation into Pendling and the Bahamas.
Law enforcement sources say the senators want to know whether the State Department, for political reasons, out of fear of offending the Bahamian government, stopped American agents who were investigating drug corruption in the Bahamas.
These exposés masterfully painted the new island nation into a world of shadows.
Well, I think the Bahamas is the most corrupt place in the world.
This one, a drug smuggler, told NBC News producer Ira Silverman that corrupt Bahamian police sold him more than $1 million worth of cocaine.
When we went to pick it up from the police, we'd go right into Nassau International Airport.
Where would you actually pick up the cocaine?
Right there at the airport.
How would that happen?
Well, they'd bring it out in a police car.
Are you serious?
Well, yes, the best protection you can get, isn't it?
It painted the island ports as a drug empire where the mob, foreign investors, Wall Street financiers, and South American cartels flourished. The Bahamas was a nation for sale, with Pendling as its CEO.
No way. Pendling was always anti-drugs. I don't care what anybody say. Pendling could have been arrogant, Pendling could have been a number of other things, but involved in drugs, no.
Accusations because they couldn't buy Pendling. They couldn't get him to do what they wanted him to do. He wouldn't do as they wanted because Pendling was obligated to, he was married to the Bahamian people. His job was to work for the Bahamas and his people, not for foreign people who could tell you how to run. You can't tell me how to run my country and what's best for my people. I know what is best for them because I'm out of them.
I say crime and drugs is frustrating our positive image in this country.
This is Kendall Nottage, a member of the Bahamian Parliament and a cabinet minister. NBC News has learned that this summer, the FBI was actually making plans to try to arrest Nottage as part of a big federal effort to crack down on the drug groups operating out of the Bahamas.
There was a group outside the Bahamas who wanted to control this country, and they couldn't control Pendling. They couldn't tell him what to do or how he ought to run things in the country as their prime minister. And so they decided they'll concoct a story and move him on the side. Remove him.
All of that was a reaction against this very successful, proud people who were becoming aware of who they are and who they would like to be just offshore the United States. A black people who were in control of a beautiful country, but a sensitive country offshore the United States. A people who were proud enough that they would say, you must bend or be broken, offshore the United States. It was inevitable that the United States was going to say, they have to be brought under control.
As L.O. Pendling became the subject of much media hype in America, he would personally appear on NBC's Today show in September of that year.
Firstly, let me say, I've asked for the names and identifications of who my accusers are. I asked for copies of the interview with Ambassador Dobriansky to be delivered to me in Nassau or Friday when I got here. Nothing. And I don't see how you can expect me to answer charges. I don't know who made them. I don't know why they made them. I don't know where they come from. I don't even know whether they exist.
You've put these requests to NBC News?
Oh, I've put those requests to NBC News.
Or the Justice Department?
And to the Justice Department, to NBC News through my lawyer, to the Justice Department, to the State Department through our embassy.
The exposés were nonsense.
Now,
a classical assassination on a black leader who now spoke out against the doctrine of war and empire. For it was I that must destroy the mind of empire before we see it wither and die in our world.
Okay. Do you know Mr. Vesco?
Yes, I know Mr. Vesco.
How well? Have you ever had any dealings with him?
Not really. I had business dealings with a bank that he had that bought another bank with which I had had some business transactions. That is it.
Do you still have an interest in the Columbus Trust Bank, Mr. Prime Minister? You do not? Were you bothered at the time?
Let me carry on with what I said, please.
The exposés were true. And Pendling, guilty as sin. As I demonstrated through Kenneth Kaunda, anointed Zambia's Black Moses, in its social revolution, all roads to capitalistic exploitation end here.
For more than 4 years now, this beautiful, seldom visited island in the Bahamas, just 200 miles from the Florida coast, has been the base for one of the biggest drug smuggling operations in the world. This is the man who dreamed the smuggler's dream, the man at the top of the Norman's Cay smuggling operation, Robert Vesco, the accused Wall Street master swindler who fled the United States 10 years ago and is now said to have made millions of dollars in the drug business in the Bahamas since the late 70s.
The exposés prompted the government to appoint a commission to investigate drug trafficking in the islands. Among those selected to serve on the investigative committee were 3 foreigners and 1 national.
For me, it was a painful exercise. Painful in the sense of seeing the destruction that the drug trade had effected. A young drug leader was brought in to give evidence. And I heard this tremendous outcry outside of the building. When he appeared, the school children came, they flocked him like somebody who was a national deliverer. And that really blew me. I was totally unprepared for something like that.
On the streets of the Bahamas, there are now many young people who are addicted to cocaine. Corman Bannister admits he's one of them. And that's one reason he's decided to go against his father and his father's friend, Prime Minister Pendling.
I'm talking about Lyndon Pendling. I'm talking about my father and other people in the hierarchy, but that were below them.
The drug era was a horrible time. The fast and easy money, the turning away from the reality of the drug trade, the finding the excuse. For example, we often heard that the drugs go into the States, So what if Bahamians making a couple dollars, sending it to the States? But guns came with drugs. There's no drugs without guns. And we benefited economically, but socially I think were destroyed by the drug trade.
I used to hope maybe this is just a setup. Maybe we're doing too good here. Maybe these couple of thousand niggas down there just living too good. Let's put a sting on them. I wanted to believe anything except that it was true. And the evidence was too strong.
Those who testified included government officials, policemen, drug traffickers, businessmen, and anyone who seemed knowledgeable about the illegal drug trade.
Even as scattered as those keys are, allowing for that kind of activity, planes flying in and out and in and out.
What the commission uncovered, ultimately, was that since 1972, some $17 million in cash had been given directly to Pendling or to companies in which he had a secret interest. The explanation given for the money was that they were gifts and loans.
He pointed out that there were many, there was evidence which the commission was provided with of so-called loans that were given to Mr. Pendling and his friends. And extorted sometimes from the local business people too, who had legitimate businesses. And these were not loans. They took the money and they called them loans, but there is no documentation of anything. And clearly, Mr. Pendling lived far beyond his official salary.
But none of the money could be tied to drug trafficking, and Pendling was acquitted of being involved in the drug trade. He would famously declare that the problem with drug trafficking is not with the Bahamas, but with the demand from consumers in the U.S.
are the latest infrared pictures taken by pilots of the U.S. Customs Service of what is going on night after night in the air over the Bahamas.
Break. Subject's opening the door. Watch out for the drop there, 8 Alpha.
Planes from Colombia making airdrops of duffel bags of cocaine.
Dropped another bag.
Worth millions and millions of dollars.
1985 was a crucial year for South Africa, for it was then that the President of South Africa was expected to make an announcement.
Was expected to make a major speech. And the general expectation was that in that speech he would indicate a break with apartheid, would accept that apartheid was wrong, was bad, and that change was needed. He didn't. Instead, he said apartheid will continue. And that resulted in a further intensification of the international campaign against apartheid.
Despite the investigation into drug trafficking, it was decided among the Caribbean and African leaders that the Bahamas would host its next 49-member head of state government meeting.
Firstly, more than anything else, it was the stature which Pinling had earned within the Commonwealth. Having been there for a long time, people saw in him, they saw the natural strengths of leadership.
As the heads of state, including the Queen, descended on the islands for the 1985 conference, South Africa would naturally dominate the conversation.
It was the single most important issue at the CHOGM. President Reagan had a policy of what they called constructive engagement, I think, at the time, and which meant that you keep doing business with the South African interests with a view to changing their attitudes and so on. And we in the Commonwealth held a different point of view, and that was that you sever relationships with South Africa unless and until they change their policies with regard to apartheid and freed Mandela.
All of the heads of state agreed to sanctions, except for one, the most important one, the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher. Thatcher, who stood closer to Reagan's doctrine.
And all hell broke loose. There was a real Donnybrook with Mrs. Thatcher and the rest of us.
Just look at what we were faced with. Full mandatory economic sanctions, a ban on all imports, a ban on all exports.
That CHOGM in '86 had an unfortunate impact on Britain, on the British government's attitude to the Commonwealth. I of course saw Margaret Thatcher daily during that conference. Much more than Margaret Thatcher hoped or wanted. The agenda focused on sanctions towards South Africa.
Not that Mrs. Thatcher was not as committed as we were to the eradication of prejudice and bias and apartheid. She was, but she wanted to go about it a different way, more like President Reagan, and we didn't. We wanted to go about it in a more direct way, and so we had the conflict with her.
They were preoccupied with an anti-communist struggle, and to that extent supported the apartheid regime because it was also anti-communist.
It was Elo's moment to shine as he walked with world leaders in his country. But outside, the crowds were a sobering reminder of the moment. Signs read, "Elo must go."
The chief is a thief. By that time, of course, that was coming to the end of our reign. And I keep telling him, I said, you gotta answer these people. But he figured, well, it's not necessary. I don't think he worried about it, because he figured it was ridiculous to suggest he was in. He knew that his colleagues that it was ridiculous for them to suggest that he was involved in drugs. So what?
Much of this protest was fueled by a minority report. For though Pinling was acquitted, there was published one opinion that made his case gray.
Many of my friends asked me why I wrote a minority report, so I suppose you're going to ask me that too. For me, it was very difficult. I had known Lyndon Essay since I was a boy, and I admired him as a political leader. And I had to make a conscious decision. And when I examined the evidence that was given about his finances I could not make the determination that he had received drug money into his accounts. But it was abundantly clear to me that his accounts were in a mess. This money was coming all over the place, and some attempts were made in the inquiry to explain some of it, which I was not convinced. What amazed me was when I shared this with my two colleagues, they told me they couldn't go that far, although they admitted that the evidence I was citing did exist. Over tea, one of them said to me, you know, this is the Bahamas, and things are done differently here. In my country, it couldn't have happened. He would have to resign. So I said to him, well, don't you know you're speaking to a Bahamian? If you feel that way about your country, what do you expect me to feel about mine?
This is why Moses is socialist. But socialism does not explain why a certain African Moses deposited millions of the state's money into Swiss bank accounts.
Enough! Did you or did you not run a drug empire?
You dare ask me that? Have you no respect for leadership? For black leadership? You forget from whence I brought you, young one.
Then was it right? Was it wrong?
A riddle.
No more riddles, no more points. Was it true or false? Was it fact or was it fiction?
If by that you're asking me if I did or didn't, yes, I did. And I didn't. I did, and I did not. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right and wrong, is just that. It coexists. In the wild, drug money insured young black lives went off to universities.
As they have been for years, are the Cocaine Islands, a safe place to operate for the right price.
But it also ensured the destruction of many young black lives. For who can know which way the wind will blow? And who can know which way the tides go?
And in hot pursuit, some of the smugglers have crashed.
He just hit the water. He just hit the water.
I did, and I didn't. And I did, and I did not.
The issue of economic sanctions. The Queen, of course, is already well aware of the British Prime Minister's position, which Mrs. Thatcher will present to the conference later today. And it's this.
In 1986, the imperial powers that be let South Africa remain the only apartheid society in the world, even as its violence and mayhem got worse. While Pendling remained committed to this fight, his own fight continued as the international press condemned his Cocaine Islands. 3 of his top cabinet members resigned. 2 were fired, and his longtime sidekick, his Aaron, resigned.
It would do was we were losing credibility. It was clear that we were losing credibility and we're losing it at a fast rate. And so I said to him, I said, you know something, if we step out, maybe a new face would stop this drift.
This was Pendling's greatest moment to shine, as he walked and reasoned with the Queen. And those close to the action for the 1985 conference recount of how he quietly made the United States and the British an offer they couldn't refuse.
Pendling was known in the Bahamas as a very skillful negotiator. It is said, I was around because I was taking pictures. Of course, we knew that under Richard Nixon, it was discovered that the CIA had money in the Bahamas, and that was exposed. Well, Pendling, being Minister of Finance, would know exactly, not being the Prime Minister, of course, would know exactly all the ins and outs of both the United States and England in terms of their investment. So in a smooth way, Pendling threatened to have the Krugerrand not being able to be traded. Well, of course, Britain couldn't take that. Margaret Thatcher, they had their money tied up, of course, and it was rumored then at the time that the Queen Elizabeth money was tied up in the Bahamas also, but with a certain bank. Although it was the smallest country with the most power. Nothing is stronger than economic power, being able to control it, and he used it. And he used it to the point that he was able to accomplish what he set out to do. And all was said to an Englishman, to me, said, they said, your prime minister is very corrupt, but he's damn smart. He outsmarted Margaret.
The Iron Lady would bend.
The aspects of this very difficult file that we worked on. And all of this was very encouraging to the ANC and to Nelson Mandela.
Despite the accusations that he was merely cleaning up his image and the image of his islands, LO continued his international campaign to sell the idea of freeing Nelson Mandela.
If you will, Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Prime Minister Penlin.
Arising out of that meeting, 7 eminent persons from the Commonwealth were appointed to generate an independent assessment of the critical issues in South Africa.
Because he did not see his role just as personal achievement or just as Bahamian liberation. He saw it in the historical context. He saw himself as part of a bigger issue of liberation. Some African countries had not yet joined the Free South African movement. If a Caribbean leader says something favorable about Nigeria, about South Africa, it's the right thing to say, but does not require any courage. It's not breaking a barrier.
Neither Pendling nor Kaunda would land on America's cover as the Black Moses of the hour, and both would fade into being small footnotes of history. But Mandela himself would land its covers. This became especially known as he was set free in the early 1990s.
In 2005, we made a great strides in the fight against poverty, and I'm proud of everyone that joined the campaigns around the world.
In this warp of time and space that is I, the island ports persisted. In this landscape that is the soul of Africa, my poetry and prose was written. As cocaine continued to flow, falling from the sky like manna from heaven, so did its new slaves, its field escalating national debt, and a growing black prison populace.
Perhaps if you show your face, then we can be done with you.
Let's not show my face. Not yet.
The wild is where it ends for Moses.
The economics of the 80s and 90s in our globe have not worked for the poor in our countries. And I think we're going to have a new generation of economic thinkers.
We must address this issue of the economy, address issues of poverty, issues of underdevelopment, issues of inequality, great disparities in terms of income and wealth and opportunity which persist between black and white in the United States as they do in South Africa. So no, that would be a common struggle. That would be a common struggle throughout the black world.
If you go and look into Africa, for example, the minerals, the diamonds, are not owned and controlled by the locals there. You have a small group of persons benefiting from that economy. For us, a very small group of people benefiting from the tourism sector in terms of where the real wealth is. Wealth does not come from me working as an employee, as a waiter, as a teller. Wealth comes in a capitalist system from owning capital.
They call me Moses, the Black Moses, because I am, I was, and I will never be. I am Moses,
whose time has passed. And as the black and white markets of the island ports went to and fro, the remnant people that remained, neither here nor there, wandering for 40 years, waited. Their cry demanded for the expulsion of empire and for the introduction of equality. Theirs was a collective cry from the developing world for economic independence.
Who owned the United States 50 years ago or 100 years ago? The robber barons. All of the Morgans and the Rockefellers and so on. They were the big shots. No longer the case. Pension funds representing ordinary people have more to do with ownership of stocks and so on and companies than anybody else. So the same thing in Canada. So it's an evolutionary thing. It takes time. What Lyndon did, which was indispensable, is that he seized the political control and established, because if you're in charge of your country, then you establish the rules of the game.
Let me quote something in the story of Moses and Joshua that's very important. It says, "The day that Joshua crossed the river, the manna stopped." Think about the implication. Manna represents free food, free covering, free nutrients, free supply, free. As the next generation of leaders in the Bahamas, post the Moses, we're going to have to be responsible for the future of the Bahamas. There won't be any more miracles. We have to create our own miracles. That means we got to plant our own food and sew our own clothing. We got to build our own houses. We got to secure our own farms. We got to build our own boats. We got to take our own risks. And that's what I think we are in danger of not doing, because we think that the miracles are still going to work.
I don't know how that is in Bahamas. I'm talking about Haitians. You can talk them to death. Haitians are hard-headed. But this is an example I'm talking about. Can you imagine if the Congos developed a country and really was able to sustain its wealth for the whole, like the way America has developed, and it being the wealthiest economy in the world. Right now, the wealthiest economy is America, right? 14 trillion a year. China just passed Japan this year or last year, making it the second largest economy, right? Can you imagine saying an African country is the wealthiest economy in the world at $22 trillion a year? You know what it would do for every other black nation? What? The Congos? They hot like that? Oh, we gotta get our swag on.
Well, I think the spirit of let my people go worked because they let us go, but now we're saying let us live. You know, we're free to sit any place on a bus. That was an issue for us. We're free to sit in a restaurant, go in a restaurant. That was an issue for us. We're free to sleep in a hotel, and that was an issue for us. But now we can't afford to sleep there because we can't afford to pay for it. We can ride the bus, but can't afford the bus fare. And so now the economic disparity is something that we still are fighting for.